process has a mission of expanding the economic, political, and moral foundations of a free society. And we do this through a variety of programming. We have a regular economics book colloquium where students get to read economic writings, sometimes contemporary, sometimes classic works, and get to discuss them throughout the course of the semester. We have obviously our free market speaker series where we bring in scholars from around the country to present to us on a variety of topics. We have our research fellows. And so our faculty are affiliated with the center and working on various projects that are consistent with the mission for the Center for Public Choice and Market Process. We have a few of our fellows here in the audience tonight. And we have our Adam Smith Week, which is sort of our marquee program. That's every March. Look for information about that. And then probably, obviously, one of our main focuses and one of our bigger programs, we are very student-centered focused programs. So we have the Market Process Scholars and Public Choice Associates, which are our mentoring programs. So if you see students wandering around and they look a little better dressed than the rest of you and they have name tags, right? Ask them about the program and what it is that they're doing. If you are interested in learning more about the center and its events, there is material over here on the table. So on your way out, please feel free to grab some of our marketing materials to learn more. At this point in time, I want to introduce one of our market process scholars to introduce our speaker for this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Riley Haas.
Dr. Lauren Heller is a professor of economics at the Campbell School of Business and assistant provost for teaching and research at Berry College. Her research interests include international health and development economics, as well as a wide variety of policy questions and topics in applied microeconometrics. She has published scholarly articles in a wide range of outlets, including the Eastern Economic Journal, Contemporary Economic Policy, Defense and Peace Economics, the Journal of Developing Areas, and Social Science and Medicine. She especially enjoys using her econometric and data analysis tools to debunk myths surrounding public finance and economic development, as she'll do in her lecture tonight. When Dr. Heller was our age, she attended Capital University, where she majored in economics and went on to receive her Ph.D. in economics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We are so glad to have her with us, and now I'll turn it over to Dr. Heller.
Thank you so much, Riley. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you about all kinds of ways we could be thinking about urban economic development. I know that's a theme of the sort of free market speaker series this year. And I think it's going to be a theme of Adam Smith Week and all kinds of things coming up. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. And I want to thank all of the folks at the Center for Market Process for inviting me. So here's the idea, right? When we talk about urban economic development, politicians especially, but also event promoters, stadium owners, right, team owners, promoters of major events often claim, right, that they bring huge spillover benefits, right, to the communities that they that host them. Right? And so typically what's the rationale for this, right, is that they're going to bring a whole bunch of new travelers to the host city. Those folks are going to spend money in the city, right, and then imply sort of a ripple effect through the community. They're going to pay local taxes, right, and those would tend to be the monetary, right, things. Another thing they typically talk about, particularly they talk about this more when the economic numbers don't show up, is they talk about this idea of sort of metro pride and recognition. Like if we get to be the host of the Republican National Convention, that'll really put Cleveland, Ohio on the map, right? Or if we get to host the Super Bowl, what's that going to mean, right? And so there's lots of examples of this. So this is from my hometown that I grew up, which is one of the reasons I talked about it. But for example, when the Republican National Convention came to Cleveland, oh my gosh, guys, you would have thought, right? They were talking about like, this is the thing that's going to put Cleveland on the map. think about all the spending that's going to happen as a result of all those folks coming, right? And they estimated the event promoters, typically what they do is they hire people that want to bring, these kinds of events or build a stadium or do something like that. They'll hire these sort of consultants from places like Rockport Analytics and other firms to talk about the economic impact of all of these things. And they typically give you pretty big, almost too good to be true, potentially, estimates of the economic impact of these things throughout the local economy. And so, for example, the Cleveland Plain Dealer estimated an impact of somewhere between 200 to 400 million, depending on which impact study. I mean, what's 200 million in a range, right? For hosting the RNC in Cleveland in 2016. We're already seeing the new, and you always see hype like this. So there's now, the people, right, of Phoenix are super excited, right? That they now have this Super Bowl countdown clock for next year unveiled at the airport. This article is from a few days ago. I love it so much that some lady is dressed up as a weird airplane. I'm not even sure what's up with that. And apparently they now have a football mascot for just hosting the Super Bowl. I'm super excited. And so this is just one example that you could pull. This happens every time somebody hosts the Super Bowl, right? And that, they said, well, the last time was in 2015 when the state saw a $720 million economic impact directly related to that year's game. And they say things like economists project, and they always use this word economists very loosely, usually. Economists project this season's Super Bowl will exceed that. Okay. And so then just in general, I have a lot of pictures in this talk, right? People like pictures. And so is this the thing, right? Should we be advocating for, the next big event to be held in Charleston, right? Or somewhere, right? And we can talk about why Charleston might actually be uniquely positioned not to do something like this versus a place like Cleveland, Ohio, for example. But typically the idea is that what boosters see is, the people sponsoring. So for example, the people that the Atlanta Falcons hired to advocate for the new Falcons stadium. That's the one I'm especially wrapped up in, just because my students care a lot about that fancy new Mercedes-Benz stadium. All right. But they see look at all this impact is going to transform the community. What the economists see is, yeah, there might be some impact. You're not going to bring something like the Super Bowl or a convention and just not notice it. Right. But probably a lot of those booster numbers are probably too good to be true, right? There's some impact, but it's not going to be your key to salvation, right, for your economy. And so just a sort of a localish example that I was trying to look for South Carolina examples. You guys tend not to be as egregious right now as say Chicago. That's where everybody's talking about the new stadium right now. But anyway, and so, right, the people that are building the Columbia Ballpark, this is what that built, right? This is my favorite part of this, though, that I was looking at this article, is they're confident that the $37 million Spirit Communications Park, funded with 29 of that $37 million from the city and the rest from private developers. I'm really glad that, the South Carolina tax dollars can be used, right, to really help those developers make ends meet. Because personally, when I think of who needs a leg up, who needs my tax money, who I really worry about is corporate developers, right? Let's all just pour one out for them, right? Okay. And so economists, right, they're kind of skeptical of this. So wait a second, right? So you're telling me, right, that you want to promote long-run economic growth in your city, and you're going to do this by using taxpayer dollars to build a stadium? Something's going on, right? Economists are sort of naturally skeptical creatures, but this, even non-economists, sounds a little bit like something you guys already might have some kind of hint that probably, if we're thinking about long-run urban economic development, probably just build a stadium, problem solved, is probably not going to do it, right? And so why are economists skeptical? And I'm giving you an overview. By the way, there's a lot of economic research that underlies all of this, but I'm not going to give you any regression coefficients unless someone asks for them. I have them hidden, just in case you're like, oh, but I want statistics, Lauren. I have that for you, don't worry. But just trust me, there's things. So for example, even though I'm going to give you a couple anecdotes, even though I am fairly famous for saying the plural of anecdotes is not data, right? Like just because you have a story doesn't make it true, right? However, I think these are illustrative. So an economist friend of mine who's at Stanford just told me this story that he was going to take his younger son to the art museum on the morning of December 28th, but they couldn't find a place to park thanks to the Birmingham Bowl, so they went home. Right. So one of the reasons that these events don't have the economic impact that we might think is because often a lot of these studies sort of assume that this new thing was like dropped in the city, right? And that they can look at all of the effect of that, right? Being like a new thing being dropped in there without thinking about, well, what did it displace? What was already going on? That's one of the reasons why you could think about a city like Charleston, and you should be especially skeptical of this kind of thing. Because I don't know, I've only been here a day or two, but I feel like if you dropped a stadium or dropped a thing in this city, it would displace some other tourist activity, right? I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say tourists like to come to Charleston without that. I know, controversial, I know, right? Here's another one, right? This was from a Cleveland bartender in 2016, which is when the Cleveland political convention was there. And they were all talking about how much, right, they were going to get economic impact. They also had a whole lot of security for the Republican National Convention then, right? Trump was coming as often, right? And so there was a whole lot of security, and they had a cleared zone, and they'd all hired extra staff to be like waiting for the convention goers, right? We're going to wait, the money's going to flow in, it's going to be great. I mean, they made this great economic impact study, and they actually involved folks from Cleveland State, folks with real PhDs, not in economics, but still, right? Who told them this economic impact was going to be big. And so, right, she goes, I lost so much money in tips during the convention because my bar wasn't in the little cleared zone. No one wanted to go outside of the clear zone. And none of my regulars came around because they were afraid of the crowds. Right? So even the thought of, oh man, it's going to be brutal downtown, I'm going to stay home. Right? So that displacement is one thing. Another reason is just the economic idea of opportunity cost. Almost everyone here has had at least 5 minutes of an economics class, right? All right, so if you have had 5 minutes of an economics class, I hope you know what opportunity cost is, because if you haven't remembered the word opportunity cost, first of all, lie to your professors because you will break their hearts if you don't remember that. But also, if not, that means your professors have failed you, because this is like basic stuff, right? But basically, opportunity cost is talking about what you would have done if you weren't doing the thing you're doing, right? If you weren't making the choice you make. Every choice you make in the world involves an opportunity cost. I recognize there's an opportunity cost of you all being at this lecture today. It's whatever your next best alternative is. So I appreciate that. I feel like economists sometimes have an extra sort of appreciation for people's time because they recognize what a precious resource it is. And so this notion talks about, it's not like when these things are built or when these big events happen. So when I say mega events, I mean things like the Super Bowl or the Olympics. That's a widely debunked one, right? Like that's not even me. That's people have been debunking the Olympics forever, right? Or a political convention, right? A lot of the estimates assume that nothing's going on in that city, right? Well, so what it typically does is it just also replaces other spending that was already going to happen anyway, right? So if you think about whether you're going to go to a Falcons game, right? Well, if you weren't going to go to that Falcons game, you might not stay home on a Sunday, right? You might just have gone somewhere else or done something else, right? In that city, particularly with cities with lots of other amenities. And so a lot of these estimates don't account, right, for that sort of opportunity cost of folks' time and what they would have done otherwise, okay? Also, this is my favorite. It's the term the hangover effect, right? So often when you see big events like this, right, it actually disrupts normal economic activity and sort of setup and tear down. This is particularly important for big events, right? The RNC, but more than so than just a football game, like a regular football game, if you're looking at the economic impact of a stadium, okay? And so what happens is because of that, right, all of that setting up and tearing, is particularly the tearing down, right, disrupts normal local economic activity. So here's an example, right? This is an example. So this I made my promise. This isn't a regression coefficient, but this line may be based on regression coefficient. Okay, and so there's a whole lot of statistics back here, right? But if what you're doing is you're comparing with this line, right? So this, I don't know if I can point with this or not, but 0 is where sort of the line starts. Okay, and so when the number's below 0, that means that on that day you are renting, right, fewer hotel rooms than you would on a normal day, accounting for seasonality, day of the week, all of that other stuff. Okay, when and lots of other controls. Okay, when it's above 0, that it means that that is the additional impact above and beyond the normal day of the week that you do, comparing to all kinds of years. We usually do this kind of analysis for years and years of data. Okay, daily data, by the way, that's generally my wheelhouse for my research, is I use daily data for hotel rooms and things, because you can account for things like this hangover effect. So look what happens before the Super Bowl. Okay, so you sort of see a run up, right? Up into, and by the way, that dotted line, did you all see that? It's a little light on this screen. You can see that dotted line. That's the day of the Super Bowl. Okay, and so you see a run up. Anybody, like, this is going to be, I'm going to think you ate your intellectual Wheaties this morning. I'm going to be super impressed. Anybody know why there's a little dip? It's still above 0, but why there might be a little dip in that data right before 0? It has to do with the sort of marginal impact. Well, this is a tough one. Okay, so okay, you guys will be able to answer this question. What day of the week does the Super Bowl happen on? Sunday. See, look at you guys, you know stuff, right? And so if it's the day before the Super Bowl, what day of the week is that? Saturday. The day before that, what day of the week is that? Friday. See, you guys are so smart, right? So what do you guys think, right? You guys can know this from Charleston. What tend to be the busiest days of the week for people to get hotel rooms? Friday and Saturday, right? So this data is showing you this sort of marginal impact, the additional impact of being the Super Bowl. So on 2 days before and 1 day before the Super Bowl, yes, there are a lot more hotel rooms let. But because we've accounted for things like the days of the week, seasonality, all that kind of stuff, right? That impact, right, is not as big. It's not as big of an additional impact because there's already a lot of hotel rooms let on Fridays and Saturdays. Does that make sense? But then what do you notice, right? After that, we see this hangover effect of all of a sudden after the Super Bowl, there's actually fewer hotel rooms let in the days following. And this is, by the way, consistent. It doesn't matter. I put New Orleans in 2013 here, but every city I've seen that hosts the Super Bowl has this effect, right? And so when this is negative, it's not just negative because it's a Monday, right? Which isn't a very popular hotel room day, except for business maybe, right? But it's extra bad even for a Monday. Does that make sense? And a Monday in February in New Orleans, right? Okay. So, right, that's another one, right? Another reason why economists are skeptical is because many of these major events, right, are subject to big leakages out of the communities that pay to host them. Okay, what do I mean by that? When you think of economic impact for something like a stadium or a Super Bowl or a Republican National Convention or a something, okay, generally, you think of what's going to be the impact, like if, I'll use Chicago since they're in all kinds of arguments over the Bears stadium right now, right? If you're Chicago and you're thinking about whether to replace Soldier Field or not, which to me is heresy, but it's fine. They didn't ask my opinion. I mean, maybe I'll tell them in an op-ed, but they didn't ask yet. But anyway, and they won't ask me, right? Because they don't want to know what I think. But anyway, if you're thinking about, all right, should we replace Soldier Field, right? And you're thinking about, well, if I think I replace it, we might get to host a Super Bowl or something. That's, by the way, one of the big things they often do when NFL owners are trying to get you to build a new stadium, which is usually, by the way, wildly inefficient. Think about this, a large building, huge, in the middle of a city that hosts like less than 20, that is full, right? Less than 20 times a year, right? This is not great, right, in terms of economic impact. And we can talk a lot if you guys have questions about, answers to things like, well, it's a mixed use community and all this other stuff. We can talk about that, right? But right, one of the things they try to do is they say, okay, well, if we build a new stadium, we're going to get a Super Bowl. And that's going to be the thing that's going to bring all of this economic impact in, or something like that. Well, here's the thing. Let's suppose a bunch of people are coming in for the Super Bowl, okay? And so we've got, and if you think about the rationale for why, that might cause local economic impact, it's, they're going to spend money, right, on local restaurants and on hotels, right? And they're going to hire, more people, and then those restaurants are going to spend more money. And there's like sort of this multiplier effect that you might have heard about, right? Well, if it's the local citizens that are funding a stadium like this, you'd at least think that maybe you'd want the local citizens to experience that sort of multiplier effect. Okay. Now, as economists, we're often sort of agnostic as to who gets what, right? We don't care if it's sort of a big corporation, right, or a shareholder, right, or a local citizen that gets money from something. We're actually very skeptical often of like buy local arguments, right, for lots of reasons. They have great ideas behind them, but can often be misguided. Right? But here, if it's the local citizens that are being taxed, right, to build a new stadium, if it's the local citizens that are being displaced, right, from communities, then maybe the fact that they don't get all of the benefits can be a problem, right? So for example, a big part of the revenue projections for the Super Bowl don't come from so what's revenue, right? Who's here had some basic economics? Fantastic, Jenna. When I calculate total revenue for something, what am I multiplying? Something times something. Okay, quantity, so how much you sell, times price, how much you sell it for, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but anyway, she did a great job. Okay, so price times quantity equals revenue, right? So here's the thing, is that if we're thinking about how that's going to impact hotel rooms, a big portion of that increase in revenue comes from increased prices, right? This is especially true in like tourist cities, right? Because hotel room rates go to, 500, 600 and up a night, right? And that generates that. But especially in tourist cities, there's not exactly a lot of excess capacity, right? So it's not like, right, if there's not a Super Bowl, right here, Charleston hotel rooms are sitting vacant, waiting for someone to show up. Maybe a little bit in Cleveland, right? Maybe a little bit in some other cities, but in tourist cities, that's absolutely not the case. So where does the increases in revenue come from? It comes from prices. So this is average daily rates, right? That's what ADR means. Sorry, should have spelled out the lingo, right? Average daily rates before and after the Super Bowl. And this is from Minnesota, Houston, and Phoenix, right? The last 3 Super Bowls held there, right? And so what do you notice, right? Daily rates start spiking, right? All the way up until the Super Bowl. That blue line should be nudged over a bit. Okay. And then, right, fall back down to normal. But we're talking about increases, and this is, by the way, marginal effects, right? So we're not talking about you can get a hotel room for $250. We're talking about you can get a hotel room for $250 more than whatever you bought it for. So if that's the case, who guys do you, when you think about, okay, when you guys think about hotels in Charleston, who owns hotels in Charleston in general? Yeah. Private entities, but like in general, are hotels in Charleston like mom and pop operations where mom and pop are going to get more revenue and like spend it in the local community? Not like Marriott owns, right? Or Hilton or whatever, even the ones that look independent, which is fine. By the way, as an economist, I'm okay with this, right? It's great, right? But, right, it's not local mom and pop that own those, it's shareholders, right? For firms. And that's great. That's fine. It's not like we have a problem with shareholders earning that money. But if we're thinking about making the proposition, right, to a community about should I fund this stadium because then we'll get a Super Bowl, right? It's not like we're going to hire a ton extra housekeeping staff or something, right? To make that. We're already almost at capacity anyway in a lot of these cities. Hotel rooms don't just stay vacant waiting for the Super Bowl to come. That would not be a profitable enterprise, right? And so a lot of that revenue sort of leaks out of the local community and goes and makes, right, Marriott shareholders happy, right? Which is fine, but Marriott shareholders aren't the ones footing the bill, right? Okay. And sometimes this can get really bad. So my favorite, like, so sad. I want us all to feel bad for San Jose, particularly in 2016. Okay, because specifically Santa Clara, there's a stadium there, Levi's Stadium, or at least it was in 2016. I may have called it something different now, right? And they're like, we're going to host a Super Bowl. It's going to be great. We're going to have all of this revenue from the Super Bowl. I'm going to show you a map. So Levi's Stadium, well, it's that dot in the middle, and there's a general radius around Levi's. Do you know what's just outside of the radius? Up that peninsula right there? San Francisco. Okay, now let's think about this. People that go to the Super Bowl, are these poor people? No, Super Bowl tickets are not cheap, right? They're hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So you're spending thousands of dollars to go to a football game. And by the way, this is for the ticket. This is before we're talking hotels and flights and all this stuff. You're spending thousands of dollars to a football game. Do you think you're staying in Santa Clara? Where do you think you're staying? San Francisco, right? Who cares that a San Francisco hotel room is $1,000 a night, right? I'm spending thousands of dollars for the ticket, right? And so, right, thanks to vacant, like, so they had all of these vacant hotel rooms, like basically nobody stayed in, right, San Jose, everybody stayed in San Francisco and other places, right? And so, right, it says with 3 out of every 10 rooms vacant, the city won't reap the nearly 1.9 million additional taxes it forecast that it would deliver. And this is just taxes, guys. This isn't even talking about like other spillover benefits. Like they're not even going to get, enough taxes to cover the costs. So they spent 1.25 million on police services and other things as part of hosting the Super Bowl. It cost them more, right, to host the Super Bowl. They got maybe 600,000 in extra hotel taxes. Like, I mean, you can't even, I mean, you can buy, can you buy a nice house down in Charleston for $600,000? I don't think you can. Well, maybe, I mean, I'm talking like this historic, like I took a tour yesterday, like the Fancy Pants District. I don't think you can buy a house in the Fancy Pants District for $600,000. I don't know what they call it, SOB or something. I don't know. Something like that. Anyway, south of Broad. I was not swearing just now, right? Anyway, I've learned things in the past 24 hours. But anyway, so, right? And so they didn't even make enough money from the hotel taxes to cut, like not even half to offset their police costs, right? Okay. So, and it's not just me, like it's not just So here's my point is I've given you a bunch of graphs and a bunch of things, but this actually is pretty well known in the literature, okay? So economists, right, unlike politicians, this is by the way true in general, and unlike the consultants they pay, right, can often substantiate their claims, right? So first of all, we have data. We can measure this, right? But also we have an even more important tool than data. We have the magic of peer review. So a consultant often gets hired by a politician to make these big economic impact claims, and they just put it out, right? And I'm making fun of Rockport Analytics, but man, they always seem to be the firm that like gets paid a whole lot of money by like an NFL owner to substantiate that their, claim is going to be worth it. All right, and they get paid a lot, but you know what? Nobody checks them. Instead, right? A good reporter will call somebody like me, right? But often reporters just pick up, well, right? Economists at Rockport Analytics estimated that the Super Bowl is going to bring $9,000 bajillion. And by the way, I'm using bajillion because it's just as silly as often a lot of these claims are, right? Like, let's just make up numbers then, right? I'll make up numbers too, right? But actually, when I write something, unless it's an op-ed, right? I actually have to submit it to other people in my field who actually scrutinize it and give me feedback, right? And so these are just some things that I've written with other folks. This was an op-ed I wrote about the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. I felt like I needed to tell my hometown. I needed to be the wet blanket. I just needed to do it, people, right? And then I've written, there's another op-ed, and I'll give you guys any kind of links you want. This is an academic journal article, but I still feel it's somewhat accessible, that a colleague and I wrote. It's in the Journal of Sports Economics. I'm very proud because I'm not a sports person, and now I can say I'm a sports economist. But anyway, right? It's the closest I'm ever going to be. And by we, by the way, I mean not just me. There's lots and lots more. So here's a bunch of different sites of a whole bunch of different people covering, this is a lot of daily data. So I did mostly, there's also been before this, there's been monthly data with sales tax revenue, there's been yearly data, and none of these things, by the way, talk about something like the Olympics. Like the Olympics is so well known as like not a good economic idea that like we don't even publish about it anymore. Like we're good, right? Like I actually remember when Rio won the Olympics years ago, and like a lot of economists were like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, right? And so, right, it's pretty well known that like the cities just don't reap the benefits, right, from these stadiums. Who really reaps the benefits is usually the owners of the stadiums, right? Whoever that is, right? Usually like, for example, Arthur Blank in Atlanta, right, owner of the Falcons. He and his shareholders and stuff are who reap the vast majority of the money, right, from Mercedes-Benz Stadium, right? And so again, like this is a quote from Marketplace. Like anybody who listens to like NPR is not like some right, like far right crazy, like like if it's on Marketplace, it's pretty mainstream, right? And they did some things back in 2015, right? Like this is not that new, guys, where they basically said, guys, like there's not much economists agree on, right? Actually, there's in some textbooks, there's like 10 principles that most economists agree on. One is like trade isn't generally a good thing. We should trade with each other and things like that. If you guys haven't covered that in economics, I bet you will, right? Another one is that these stadiums and mega events don't have the economic impact. Like it's almost that widespread, okay? I like this quote though. A fairly famous person that studies this stuff says the baseball team has about the same impact on a community as a mid-sized department store. So not a lot. And by the way, baseball is actually better, right, in terms of economic impact than something like football, because they have a lot more games, right? So at least that stadium is going to be a little more full, right, more often. And so, right, I like memes sometimes, right? So you might think, well, stadium owners, they're getting all of the benefits from this, right? So, right, that means that stadium owners should be paying. I'm sure that stadium owners are the ones that are, getting all of paying for this, right? Because I mean, like seriously, when someone goes and, goes to an NFL game and they pay for parking, are they paying the city for that parking? No, right? They're paying the Falcons, right? If they, go in and they, buy a ticket and, buy something from one of the concession stands, right? Is the city getting that money? No, right? So, right, they mostly pay for this, right? This is essentially a private business enterprise, right? No, right? No, the stadium owners don't pay for them. Right. So this is my latest, fun example is the Bears debacle, right? And by the way, this is not new. Like this is this month's thing, or this year's thing, kind of. But just wait, in a year, some other NFL owner is going to hold its city hostage and say, we're going to move the beloved sports team unless you pay up, right? And so you guys know the Bears is in Chicago, right? It's very cold and snowy in Chicago. All right, so this doesn't include a retractable roof and would need public funding, right? And so this is, anyway, it's a clip from The Simpsons that I thought was funny. A hat tip to one of my economist friends that came up with this, right? But basically, like, why do the Bears need our help making ends meet? Like, again, when I think of who do I want my tax dollars to go to, I can think of some really worthy causes in the world. But you know who I don't lay awake at night worrying about? The plight of NFL team owners. I just don't worry about those folks as needing my help. I feel like, they can, what we always use when we talk about the poor, and this actually bothers me, they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? I feel like NFL owners can pull themselves up and fund their own stadiums. I think they can do it. I believe in them, right? So, right, now let's talk about public choice and how all of this affects this, right? So I hope I have convinced you, at least somewhat, that these expensive stadiums, these mega events that often cities lobby to try to get, right, aren't the economic windfall what we hope. So why do we seem to get lied to year after year after year? Why can I guarantee you that after the Bears thing, there's going to be another one? I don't know what it's going to be yet. I don't know who's going to hold their city hostage, but it's going to be another one, right? Well, there's a couple reasons. So first of all, I gotta, in an economics lecture, I really gotta show an old dead dude. It's just like what we have to do. It's like a rule. But this is one of my favorite old dead dudes. And he talks about this idea of the seen and unseen. So when we think about public works like this, and Bastiat's writing in like the 1700s, okay, so he's not going to talk about football stadiums. But essentially what he says is we see the shiny objects that the tax dollars go to, right? We see, funding for, Bastiat uses things like funding for the arts and other stuff, or for soldiers or something like that. But what we don't see, right, is what that money could have been used for. What's that word for that? Opportunity cost. You guys have smart students here at the College of Charleston. Yes, the opportunity cost that could have gone to, right? So, which also, when we're thinking about, right, the average citizen, right, they see this shiny new stadium and they think, oh, that's so nice, right? But they don't see, it's much harder to see where that money was coming from, right? Another one is this idea of rational ignorance, okay, and politician incentives. Okay, so here's my question, y'all. What do campaign signs look like? When you look at campaign signs, does someone just describe to me what a campaign sign in the United States looks like? Huh? Blue and red. Okay. America. Blue and red. Okay, what else? Big name for maybe something. We don't see like nuance, right? And I decided to pick on folks running for governor. Right? I think I got both teams, right? All right. Anyway, so, right, for both of them, like I don't see like nuanced platforms here, I'm not seeing like, specifically why either one of these people would be good for South Carolina, other than that they're going to tell me that they are, right? Why is that? Why is that? That seems to be an effective strategy for these folks. Otherwise, I mean, they've been doing it for a while, right? To me, if big name for governor wasn't an effective strategy, you'd think they'd stop and do something else, right? So why do they do that? Yeah. People don't like to read, okay. Or an economist would say, reading is costly, right? And at some level, right, people recognize that individually their vote is unlikely to swing an election, right? You will have more impact on the, what you decide for dinner, right? Where you go decide, or what, like you definitely pour more thought into it, right? And you pour more thought in like next time you guys want to buy a laptop, right? That usually takes time, right? You think about it. Why? Because when you're spending your own dollars, right, that affects the outcome. But when you think about who you want to vote for, right, at some level, I'm not saying this is all normative, positive, not normative, right? I'm not saying whether you should or should not vote, right? I'm saying that you recognize that your vote, at some level, rational ignorance is almost like voters are smart, right? They recognize that their vote's unlikely to swing an election one way or another. I bet I've seen signs around here for like a student government election at the College of Charleston. Y'all, I'm pretty sure that election is going to be decided by more than one vote, right? I'm pretty sure the governor's election, right, is going to be decided by more than one vote, right? And so as a result, you don't have much incentive to research alternative ideas or candidates or nuanced political platforms. So what are you looking for? Name recognition, shiny objects. You're driving by on the highway at 50 miles an hour and you associate Cunningham with, I don't know, America or something, right? Or, okay, there you go. Yeah, and sometimes we don't even necessarily know that, right? You guys might know that. I'll be impressed, right? I did not know that before I looked it up. I just looked up, all right, who's running for governor in South Carolina? Okay, right? But I bet you actually, if you go on the street, a lot of people won't know that either, right? Because there's all kinds of incentive for them not to do that. So what does that incentivize politicians to do? They know you're driving by on the highway at 50 miles an hour. They want to do name recognition and they want to do big, flashy things. They want to give you shiny objects to look at and associate, right? Like they want to give you a shiny sports stadium, right? Kasim Reed, who was the mayor of Atlanta at the time, wanted to be the guy that brought the new shiny Falcon Stadium to Atlanta, right? Because you're not going to research how much that thing cost, right? Or if you're paying for it or how, right? But man, you're going to see him in front of that. And also he'll get to hang out with the team. He gets all kinds of fun, sort of little side benefits, right? And I'm not making fun of him in particular. Every politician is like this. Left, right, center, I don't care. They're all like this, right? So something like a sports stadium, this is perfect for a politician, right? Because they recognize what you're going to recognize. Another reason is this idea of concentrated benefits and widespread costs. It's very similar to this. Okay, so here's my question. Who benefits from a sports stadium, right? Well, and I'm running a little bit long on time, so I'm just going to tell you. I'm just going to make you guess, right? But I'm just going to tell you, right? I think one big one are team owners, stadium owners, stuff like that, right? They get a giant corporate welfare check, right? Usually to make ends meet, right? Also, event promoters, the consultants that get lots of money to give you fancy, shiny, oh, they're shiny and pretty, these economic impact estimates, not peer reviewed, but pretty, right? And people who can afford to attend professional sporting events. Now, as you guys heard from my bio a little bit, I'm kind of into international health and development economics. I kind of have a thing about wealth and poverty and like talking about impacts of policies on poor people. It's one of my things. May not be your thing, but it's one of my things. So I care about things like who really pays a tax. And is a tax or a benefit from a program more likely to fall on rich folks or poor folks? So here's my question, guys. Someone that can afford to attend an NFL game, where would you consider they would be in the average sort of income distribution of the United States? Yeah. Yeah. Middle class, wealthy, something like that, right? And I have a little bit of data to back this up from my friend Twitter, but also backed up. Like I'm just saying, there's a source down there. You guys can't see it, but it's down there, I promise. Right? So the average cost for a family of 4 to attend an NFL game in 2022, per research by bookies, so always trust the bookies, they have data for you, okay, is $536.77. That's the average across the league. What you can't see right there in fine print are those, it costs different amounts in different cities, right? That's the average. And they're looking at the lowest available ticket price, right? For each home game over the season. Lowest available, right? Including 2 beers, 2 sodas, 4 hot dogs, and parking. So that's a pretty expensive night out. It's probably not something, right? Families that can afford to attend an NFL game, do they seem to be the ones, if we're thinking about, okay, tax dollars, who needs our support? I don't think it's NFL owners. I also don't think, no offense, if you are a sports fan, I think that's wonderful, right? I just don't think you need my tax dollars to support going to your football game. It's okay, right? I think it should be great, right? But, right, let's think about this. So all of the people we've just mentioned, okay, how much do these folks receive, right? How much does a stadium owner receive from, a government deciding to, subsidize a new sports stadium? A little bit of money or a lot of money? A lot of money, right? So how much do they have, how much incentive do they have to lobby government, right, any government, to give them their sports stadium? A lot of money. Like they have a lot of incentive, right? Because they're getting a lot of money from this. So they have a lot of incentive to hire fancy pants consultants, right? To put ad campaigns out, right? To talk to all of their friends, to go to all the finest benefits, right? Where they can hobnob with politicians and tell them how it's for the people, right? Their giant subsidy, it's not for me. Think of the children, right? But here's the thing, right? And so they're the squeaky wheels that the politicians are hearing at these events and things, right? Who pays the cost though? What happens to the cost? Usually, taxpayers, right? So that cost is spread out, right? Over millions of local taxpayers, right? So yeah, each one of those millions of taxpayers, right, might only pay what, a few bucks, right, in taxes. So it seems small, right? So how much incentive do they have to lobby against a stadium? Not a lot, even if they knew about it, right? So I do think there's a little bit of like, ooh, shiny object, right? But even if they knew, right, they're kind of like, right, so it's a few extra bucks. I'm busy. There's an opportunity cost to my time. I don't have a whole lot of incentive to go and lobby against something, but man, the people getting those concentrated benefits, we call this a special interest issue, right? They're really for lobbying for it. So if you're a politician and you have a whole lot of people lobbying for it, but you don't really hear anybody lobbying against it, and you can provide a bright, shiny object to your town, right? You're going to do this all day. Does that make sense? Okay, so what can you do, right? Because often with these, these talks I end with just depression, right? Like, okay, this is going to happen again and again. And a lot of times I get questions from students about, okay, that's great, but like, what can I do? Right? Well, the first thing you can do, right, is don't fall for it. And call BS when you see it, right? One of my favorite things, whenever I get like sad about the world because a politician has disappointed me yet again, it happens regularly, right? I often think, well, you know what, I get to teach, right? I get to do stuff like this with you guys, right? I get to talk to people and help send the good word of economics, right? Proselytize the gospel that is, right? To other folks. So, right? Apply these same principles to other aspects of your civic engagement, right? So if a politician tells you something that's too good to be true, it probably is, right? Think about what you can do as an individual, right? To talk about this. To me, this is all about personal responsibility. The solution to someone else taking your money and telling you how to spend it is not for you to lobby back, right? And then say, no, you shouldn't spend it on that. You should spend it on my thing. Well, it doesn't make sense to me either, right? So, right, think about the implications of these tax and subsidies on particularly poor and vulnerable populations. By the way, do you never notice, do they ever put these stadiums in places where rich people live? Usually? No, I put them adjacent. They like doing that, right? But the people they're moving, right, for these stadiums are never the well-connected people, right? So think about that. And just think about trying to minimize the other people, the amount of other people's money that you want to spend, right? I think it's great if you want to go to an NFL game, right? And have a beer or a soda, depending on your age in this crowd, right? That's great, right? But just think about the implications that some of these things can have. I do the same thing. I lobbied, right? Really, my only like civic engagement, I still feel guilty about it, was lobbying for a dog park in my town, right? And I was really like into it, right? But in reality, right, that might not have been the best fit for that town, right? So think about what you're doing when you engage in politics and civic discourse, okay? And with that, I will take any questions y'all have. Thank you.
So if people have questions, we'll pass the mic around so that the people online can hear your question as well. So Ben, you had your hand?
Yeah. And I don't need the mic, but
Well, the people online have to
Okay.
hear you. That's
Oh,
why I have them. Trust me, I can
yes.
project too, but we have to, you know, care about our Zoom friends.
okay, well, this is like my Elwood's question, pre-Harvard, of course. So we're taught that lying on financial statements tends to be fraud. So wouldn't the people be like, they have a claim to the liability, correct? Like if they're lying on these financial statements to get investors, the investors pay, but it doesn't help the people.
Well, so
Is
they won't
fraud
tell you
not
they're
being
lying. So they
occurred?
want so the people, so they're not just outright lying, right? They're just often engaging in bad math. It's like, and they actually use some actual tools. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but they actually use tools that when in the hands of actual professional economists that understand how these things are done, or like can be used for things, right? But the problem is it's sort of like, I don't know, a car, a very useful tool, right? Very good in the hands of like an adult licensed driver, right? Giving a car to a toddler, bad, right? And so sometimes a lot of these economic impact estimates come from folks who are like, ooh, I saw someone else do this, right? And I'm going to use this same tool completely out of context, right? Not thinking about all the things that I just mentioned, right? And often, you know, it's not fraudulent in that sense. It's just not careful. Does that make sense? I mean, I love that you are so on board with my argument that you're ready to like put him in jail for fraud. I love that. So don't lose that fire. Right?
I also have one more question. Through any of your works, have you ever suggested that the states impose more taxes, like towards like these hotels that are raising their prices by like $250, or
they're still okay. So we could impose more, like, let's say hotel taxes, right? This is like the favorite thing that like tourist cities love to do, right? Is Charleston, I'm sure does this. I haven't seen my hotel bill yet, but I'm sure this is going to happen. Like the hotel's like $200, then we have another $200 tourist taxes and fees that get attached to it. Because the idea is, oh, hey, look, those other people are going to fund it. But here's the thing about those kinds of taxes. You could do that, right? You could totally tax the out-of-towners. And yeah, you may have some decrease in out-of-towners, right? But I actually am not the elasticity on that, right? Yeah, okay, good. All right. The responsiveness to price for that might not be that huge, right? Well, I probably don't look at what the hotel tax is in Charleston before I decide to come here, right? But the thing is those tax dollars, right, still could be used for something else. It's not like, if we didn't use those tax dollars to fund a stadium, that we would burn them, right? So it's Bastiat's argument all over again, right? He's not like, so he wasn't arguing when he was writing that like the things like public funding for the arts or the soldiers, or some famous examples he used. He's not arguing that those things are necessarily bad. He's just saying you got to consider the opportunity cost. So if you didn't use those tax dollars to fund, right, a stadium, consider what else you could have funded with that, right? That's why we always say in economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? I personally banned 4-letter F words in all of my classes. I would actually be fine with the most famous 4-letter F word, but just not words like free or fair when it's in a whiny tone, like it's not fair. No, we don't do that either, right? But that's I think the hotel tax argument, like that's fine, right? But you got to think about what else that money could be spent for. That's a great question.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously stadium building and mega events are not going to go anywhere. As you said, it's going to keep happening over and over again. So my question was, do you think there's anything to be done to make them better for long-term economic development? In the sense, my like follow-up question was, would stadium owners actually paying for the stadium build equal better long-term economic development, or would the benefits still be too concentrated to have any long-term economic benefit?
No, so here's the cool thing. If the stadium owners as private entrepreneurs wanted to fund their own stadiums, economists are all of a sudden like, cool, right? And honestly, if it's profitable, they'll do that, right? And so in terms of sort of long run things we could do going forward, there's other things that they've mentioned, like, and by the way, the public tide, I think, is starting to turn a little bit on this, right? So now all of a sudden when stadiums are proposed, they say things like, this isn't a stadium, guys. This is a mixed use development, right? We're going to have shops here and we're going to put apartments here. Typically when you run those numbers, they still don't work out, right? It's still just not good enough to justify all the expense, right? And if it was, right? If it was good enough that thing actually, if the benefit to doing that in terms of profitability outweighed the cost, they would do that without needing our help, right? So I think, yeah, the biggest thing, other than what I've told you guys about thinking about your individual responsibility, right, is if somehow, right, and I know Dr. Calcano's written on this and other folks have too, if somehow like sports, like the teams that have sports franchises, right, could collude and band together and be like, you know what, NFL owner, if you are going to hold us hostage for the Browns, if you're going to hold us hostage for a stadium and say you're going to take the team to Baltimore, right? If you don't, I'm still bitter over this. This has been years. Anyway, if you do that, Baltimore's going to say no too, right? There's a game theoretic reason why that's probably not going to happen either, right? But I really think the more we can sort of get the word out about like maybe stadium owners don't need our help, maybe these things aren't the economic windfall that we would hope, right? I think more good can come from that.
Thank you.
Sure. You can.
Thanks. I had a question about zoning. So it's something that we kind of like barely touched on this presentation. Has zoning played a big role in helping these city governments kind of claim the land and make sure that it's used for a stadium? Has eminent domain been involved? And kind of how do we fix that problem?
Yes, so those are sort of two different things, but yes, zoning can have both positive and usually negative effects on local communities when done incorrectly. Sometimes eminent domain has been used for these things. It's actually not the most it's pretty egregious example of property rights abuse, right? So eminent domain in general is when, just for those that might not know, is when the government sort of takes property and uses it for a public purpose, right? For something like if they're going to expand a highway and they take, 4 feet of or a road, and they're going to take 4 feet of your lawn from the front of the road, right? But eminent domain can also be used like, oh, your house is right where we want to build that stadium. Here's what we've assessed is the fair market value for your house, right? We're going to pay you that, right? Well, there's a lot of problems economists have with that, right? One of them being, if you wanted to sell your house for its fair market value, what would you have done? You would have sold it already, right? So our economists would argue that the true fair market value of a lot of these houses to the individual owners, right? Value of a good is subjective, right? Is far above, right, what the government has deemed them to do. And then sometimes it's really egregious. Like there's a whole nother talk to be had on eminent domain abuse, right? But cases like somebody's house was once taken in New Jersey, right, to expand the parking lot for a Trump casino, right? This is before Trump was a political candidate and that was necessarily political. We'll just call it a casino, right? And so it's given to a private entity, right? But yes, sometimes in some of these cases, eminent domain can be involved, which also makes it even more egregious often because of how economists feel about property rights. Like spoiler, we tend to like them. But okay. Other questions? Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the long-term effects of employment and like mega events? So stadiums tend to employ a lot of people. Do those employment effects ever produce any positive benefit enough to potentially offset the cost of the stadium?
Yeah, so generally those studies have been conducted not using daily data so much, right? But more like monthly or yearly data, just because the way in unemployment, like you don't have a daily unemployment number, right, for a city or something. But generally other people have written those papers that are not me, good people. And generally, the ones I've seen, and this is also true for like sales tax revenue and other things, don't find any significant effect, right, on unemployment and things. And I mean statistically significant, but also substantively, you know, after these mega events are held or after a sort of stadium happens. Good question.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you because I served on the commission that built a Progressive Field and the Q.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and there's and I'm not a political type person, but I'm going to tell you just some of the side effects. The National Restaurant Association studied what was the economic impact to our industry if you looked at casinos and stadiums.
By the way, do you guys know about the Q and Progressive Field are in Cleveland?
Are you from Cleveland?
Yeah.
Where?
Oh,
okay.
my mom's in Manor right now, and I know that's not technically Cleveland.
And
right?
that's
But
close enough.
yeah. And my husband's from Rocky River.
Okay. So Garfield Heights and Bay Village. So what we found, first of all, the politicians, when you look at a town, who's ever the main excavation contractor is paying a lot of political donations. You'll just be shocked. Anybody that moves dirt pays a lot of donations. The other thing, we had 2,000 vendors on the project. All 2,000 vendors were robbed. And we called in, I called in the FBI and got in trouble with the mayor because they said I should have just left it alone. So that taxpayers were ripped off there. And then we had, you would be shocked at what corporations pay for the lodges. You would be just shocked how they get that through their annual reports and the tickets that they spend money on, because it's really the lodges that are paying for the building. We had 2 73-foot trucks with monitors for the lodges. During midday, both trucks were stolen. So the citizens of Cuyahoga County paid a second time for that technology. So the amount of, on top of that, if you study the number of restaurants and independent business around these mega developments decreases. Okay, because what we've done is we've transferred wealth to one organization as opposed to helping all the organizations. And then the other thing you really have to study, gambling, like the Progressive Field, which has a beautiful 3-tier restaurant, that 3-tier restaurant, glass restaurant is becoming a casino. They're going to allow gambling there. So instead of helping Cleveland become a stronger city or lots of new buildings, we will now have 3 major gambling sites within a half a mile. So you can lose all your money in 3 different spots. That's a big problem. And then those of you that study human sexual trafficking, these major event activities like this, we know like the Masters in Augusta, the 5th largest human trafficking event in the country. NFL events, it's very, very bad for just the whole trafficking situation. So there's a social cost that you as a taxpayer, and then in Cuyahoga County, they pay the tax, but those stadiums, they really impact 14 different counties, but only one of the poorest counties pays the tax.
Yes. absolutely. So do you want to go on the road together? I feel like this would be great.
I was coming here because I thought you were gonna say they're good, and I know they're not.
That's awesome. Thank you. That was fun. Okay. I really just kind of like, well, yeah, two Cleveland people just making it happen. The thing I was going to bring up in addition to yours is I had a question, and this is right related to what, all right, hold on. Where is it? To your question about crime and trafficking and all of that stuff. So let me just click right to there we go. So my sort of answer to people that say, well, what about the intangibles, right? So what about the pride to Cleveland of hosting the RNC, right? Or hosting us the pride to Atlanta from Super Bowl. Well, yeah, so sure, there are some non-pecuniary benefits. It's not all about the money, right? There are some non-pecuniary benefits that can occur, right? But if we're going to account the non-pecuniary, like the things that are hard to measure in terms of benefits, we should also include the things that are hard to measure in terms of cost, right? What about crime? What about noise, right? Not always everyone around the community finds the stadium just this lovely, peaceful place. Right? What about traffic, right? And so, if we can really assert that those potential benefits outweigh, like I just find it really hard to imagine that there would be so many non-pecuniary benefits, right? That they would outweigh some of the real costs, like financial costs that we see, right? And you're absolutely right that there's also a lot of, right, hard to measure costs too that we think from that. So awesome. Thank you.
Any questions?
So I have a question kind of off topic for your presentation, but because your presentation is kind of based on private owner runs and own the stadiums and kind of runs that. So I want to ask your thought about governments owning and running the stadium, like running and owning.
Yeah,
the
so
stadium.
to me, maybe the only thing worse, right, than the private stadium owners, right, being forced, footing only a small percentage of the bill, right, for this stadium would be a government, right, paying all of it, right? So essentially, some of what I'm arguing, right, is that, right, we're funding something, right, that's not necessarily profitable for a community, but at least in most of these cases, private owners pay something, right? Usually not a ton, but something, right, towards their own profits, right? But my argument is probably even more so because then you've got both the extra public funding and also probably some inefficiencies that also come from not facing certain market tests. Like there's not very much, right, of a market test in this way. I think about other things about the NFL and others. And I do like actual sports, guys. I'm not anti-sports. Let me be clear. I'm actually current reigning champion of my fantasy football league. I will be available for autographs after for that specifically. But anyway, like I actually like sports. But think about the things we tolerate from sports teams that we would not tolerate from like anybody else, right? What if a bunch of firms colluded in the labor market and said, nope, if you want to work for our firm, you've got to go through this clearinghouse. You've got to be drafted and only work for us here, right? Sports teams said, we're going to limit the number of companies that we can have in your city. And we're all going to get together and collude and decide how those companies should be distributed. We would not put up with it, right? So at least there's some market, there's not a lot, but there's some ways that stadium owners and team owners can face a little bit of feedback, right, from the market. I would worry about if it was completely, let's say, a state-owned enterprise of some kind, right, that they wouldn't even have that, right? But that sounds like a great, like sometime if you and I like are talking over coffee, that sounds like a great thing to like sort of talk through too. Because there are things where the public can own something and it's not like a complete disaster, right?
Any other questions? Do we have any questions on?
You guys had some
Well, I'm
great
curious.
questions.
What do you say? Are you going to go to Chicago and tell them they're nuts?
No, so it was a lot easier to tell Cleveland they're nuts. Because it's like, when I write an op-ed in the Plain Dealer, like, I grew up there, like I can have some cred. It's a lot harder And actually a friend of mine, JC Bradbury at Kennesaw, loves fighting with the Marietta Daily Journal. Like his Twitter feed is a constant yelling at them because he's from Marietta, right? So maybe, often it's funny, this is the kind of great part about doing this research is like my mom probably knows more about this research than any of my other work. Because every time there's a Super Bowl, since I've published a paper on the Super Bowl, and there's one every year, it turns out, reporters, when they're smart, sometimes call me, right? So I do that kind of thing, but no, I'm probably not going to go to Chicago, but I will spread the good news and I will be the wet blanket.
No offense, Arlington is just not Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I don't know what they're smoking out there, but whatever.
Any other questions? If not, then I would ask you to take one last time to thank Dr. Heller for being here tonight. Again, if you'd like to learn more about the Center for Public Choice and Market Process, please take some of our marketing literature. We have an event coming up about a month from now on October 18th. Sam Staley from Florida State University is going to be here to talk more about this sort of theme of land use and how it's being used, and again, some of the public choice aspects of it. So I encourage you to follow us on social media to learn more about that. If you're not following us on social media, we are on all the social media platforms. And our market process scholar, Emily Cook, just killed it today, taking over Instagram, right? So check out our stories, right? I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm sure Dr. Heller will be here for a few more minutes to take any questions if anybody wants to stick around. Thank you.